It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. So the talk is all about how to get ready for the agile workforce in how to become a chameleon whisperer. So just before we get to the slides, let me just quickly say that's my beautiful family. I'm a proud mom to 4 teenagers. And the only reason why I'm showing that is the relevance of why I'm talking today is that I'm responsible for facilitating and certifying the HR, the talent workshops here in South Africa for IC Agile. So that's the focus of the talk. What have we learned over the last 18 months or 2 years since we've rolled this out? So I think I want you to quickly stand up. And I want you to just think about what Stephen said yesterday. So he spoke to us about, he ended his talk, and he said that there's a course or a workshop that he has that will teach you how to speak to anyone about anything. Now, unfortunately, let's for a moment imagine that you had a braai. I know that Miles and the rest of the team had a lovely a South African braai for all the international speakers. So you had one of the braais, and whoever is mingling with you don't have those skills yet of how do you talk to anyone about anything. So it's unfortunately the question of, oh, I've heard you worked at whatever. Let's take Standard Bank for a moment. I hear you working at Standard Bank. So you're getting the question, is that a workplace that you would recommend? So I want you to turn to your partner or the person sitting next to you and just quickly say, would you recommend your company as a place to work and why? 2 minutes to quickly share that. Okay, thank you very much. I think you can all take a seat, wrap up the conversation, and let's move on. So the reason why I've asked you to everyone is talking now, okay, team? So the reason why I've asked you to think about the question is if you think about employee or the employee net promoter score, that's exactly the question they would ask for the employee net promoter score. And a survey that was done by the Human Edge, I think they sent it out to about 20,000 South Africans, they found that only 24% of the people that participated in the survey said that they will actually recommend their company as a place to work. And that for me is quite a scary one. If you think of the presentation that Jaco did yesterday, and he actually showed us that transition curve, that is now without people going through a transition of going agile or becoming more agile or whatever that might be. And so that's really quite a scary thought. And that's the whole notion of let's become a chameleon whisperer. So if we think of a chameleon, what does that mean? Or a chameleon worker, what does that mean? So the chameleon worker is a term that was coined by Accenture in about 2016. And that's really an individual that is tech savvy, that learned quickly, and that can adjust to change. And I think for all of us sitting here in the room, not necessarily as leaders, as managers, but also for the teams, how do we actually connect with those chameleons in our business? And are you a chameleon yourself? Are you tech savvy? Can you adjust and learn quickly? And are you able to adapt to change. Now, two things, or actually three things that was quite interesting for me about chameleons is, first of all, they change colors. And they actually change colors in 20 seconds. Now, who in the audience know why they're changing colors? Any suggestions? What would you think? To camouflage, yeah? And that's really what most people think, that a chameleon is actually changing colors to camouflage, and it's actually not the case. They're changing colors because that's the way how they communicate with one another. Another interesting one is if you have a look at that eye. So what we will find with a chameleon, both eyes can look in different direction, 180 degrees. And so it basically means that they can focus on two different objects at the same time, giving them a 360 view of what's happening around them. I can't remember this morning who spoke about, being aware of what's happening in your environment, but I mean, that's the second thing that comes to mind. And then thirdly, I showed you my beautiful family. So I'm a mom of a blended family, and the first vacation that we did as a family, we went to Namibia. So I don't know who of you has been to Swakopmund. Okay, the people that went to Swakopmund, did you do that desert tour? Yeah. And did you actually see one of those chameleons? So you will see the chameleons in the desert is quite big. They're not the small, tiny ones that we usually see in pictures. They're quite big. But what was fascinating for me is that we left early morning, and when we got to that chameleon, this big, funny, almost ugly animal sitting there, and it was all black. And what I didn't realize is it's changing the colors really to adapt to the cooler environment, try to save the energy. And then as soon as the tour guide gave him a worm to eat, and at that moment, it actually changed the colors, become almost grayish, pinkish. So that's just some interesting stats on chameleon workers. So how do we now pull this back to the agile environment? I think for us, let's first have a look at what are some of the HR trends. So the presentation or the talk that I would like to share with you is really focusing from a leadership perspective, but also from an HR perspective. So who in the room are from the HR field? Okay, wonderful. I'm so glad to see you. I'm also, my whole career, I've been in HR, so I'm passionate about helping the HR teams really remain relevant. If we think of, I think Evan opened the conference yesterday saying that we can only be as agile as the least agile department. And unfortunately, so often we will find that our talent teams are not very agile. And to see how we can adjust to really enable the business to perform. So here are some of the trends that we see. It's really a focus for the future of work to be more human-centric. It's all about personalization and employee experience. You will also find that it's the well-being market that is exploding. So I think that for me is another interesting one, because if you have a look at the Gallup survey, I think it was about 67% of the people that participated say that they're almost on the burnout phase. And that is really a scary statistic if you think of your team, and 67% are actually almost there where they're on the brink of burnout. You from the agile environment know that it's all about teams, it's all about the communities of practice. Diversity and inclusion remains a big topic, and when we talk about innovation, we will understand why. The gig economy, big topic. I don't see Emma in the room. She was here yesterday, and I'm so looking forward. She's launching an amazing platform next week that is actually linking in the HR environment the different companies and with the gig economy, the contractors there. And then I think if we look at another important theme of the future of work, it's really about reskilling. So we all know that where we are today and the jobs that will be applicable in the future is not necessarily the same ones. It might change slightly. It might be that it does not exist, but it's all about how do we take responsibility of reskilling not only ourselves, but the people in our teams as well. So for me, I think it's the easiest place to share with you 3 C's. Because if you think of how can you become a chameleon whisperer, just remember it's about connection, it's about your currency, and it's about your curiosity. And I just love the question that you've asked the previous speaker when he ended, and she said, please explain to me what was the branding or where is that coming from? And that's such a beautiful example of being curious. So let's start all with connection, and I think a lot of the speakers has actually mentioned that yesterday and today, but I think for us to be a chameleon whisperer, we need to be able to connect in a different way, a new way, not only with ourselves, but also with our teams and the organization. If you think of the example, I actually haven't shared that with you, but the example of, I worked with a team recently, and they rolled out this beautiful, thought-through performance management system. And as they rolled it out, they were so chuffed because they really did a lot of effort. Look at best practice, what's everyone doing? And in the end, they realized whenever they have a deadline, the R&D team is missing the deadline. So whenever they need to submit something, they're not submitting it. Whenever they need to do something, they're not doing something. And I think for them, the team, it was such a big aha moment to realize, but we have designed something without actually involving and co-creating with the business. We thought we will have a look at what's best practice and how can we roll that out. And in the end, it's that big realization that one size does not necessarily fit everyone. I had a talk with one of the HR leaders at a big investment bank looking at how they have changed some of their policies. And I love her words that she said, Anja, fairness is not necessarily sameness. And I think that's an important topic for us to understand from an HR perspective as well, is that one size will not necessarily fit all. I mean, we've spoken about the employee value proposition, but if we talk about human centricity, it's actually the individual's value proposition. So who's sitting here in front of you, and what do you need to do with that individual in order to enable them to be their best selves or bring their best selves to the work? So I think that's another important theme. What I have seen with the HR teams, especially when we during the workshop, you might have seen that as well, is they want that recipe. So they want to say, okay, step one, let's do this. Step two, let's do that. And like so many others has said, there's actually no recipe that we can follow. It's really about experimenting and learning. And then immediately you think, but Anja, we can't experiment with our people. It's the talent in the company, I can't. A software product is something else. And I think the beauty is when they actually realize that if you co-create the solutions with the business, it's far better solutions. And if you actually have a look at not trying to be perfect, because I think so often from an HR perspective, we want to roll something out with a big bang and it must be perfect. And that perfect is actually a blind spot in so many times for us. So that is another big aha. It's not about being perfect. It's really about co-creating. And I think that's also why we don't take whatever you see work at another company and just implement that. We're all in different cycles. If you have a look at your company, we have a different client base, we have a different life cycle, we have different value streams. So you can't just take that and copy and paste. It's really about what will work for your team. And then to understand, but what works for this team might be different to working for that team, and that is okay. That's actually what it's all about if you want to be human-centric. We've spoken yesterday about the humble leaders. I perhaps just quickly want to touch on that if we talk about connection. And I think it was Bias that used the metaphor of being a gardener. And just remember that again. As a leader, you need to connect, be that gardener that actually creates the environment for your employees to thrive. And another big theme that we see whenever we implement the Agile across the board is that the mid-managers, that's the group that we need to be very mindful of. That's the group that sometimes feel quite threatened if we're now going to have to a more flatter hierarchy. What's the type of conversations that you're going to have? I loved Stephen's talk yesterday where he actually reminded us about the 5 critical conversations, or how do you show up with those conversations. But I think for me, it's even more important to think of the everyday conversations that we have. Irrelevant if you're a leader or the manager or the HR team, but the quality of the conversations, that is really what's making the difference. With regards to connection, I'm just thinking of the time because I have so many points that I would like to share. So if we then talk about the employee experience, it's really to think of where does it start? Because it actually starts when you start to recruit the people. And what is that experience for them? It's also about thinking of how do you communicate, because we so often, the sender determines the communication method, and it's actually not the case. What is the receiver of the message? What is the format or the platforms that they prefer? So that was a big insight for them as well. I have to say something about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, because we touched on that yesterday, and I think it's key to understand that knowledge workers craves autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And Stephen has spoken about purpose again in the previous discussion, and I can't overemphasize the importance of giving your teams the why and the boundaries, but allow them to figure it out for themselves. One of the HR directors said that was the most difficult thing. I'm so used to telling them what to do and giving them ideas, but really to step back and just to create that environment where they can come up with their own solutions. But back to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So what you will find when an individual is doing a task that's more routine, they will actually be incentivized by giving them a bonus. So when you say, do this, you will get that the bonus, it will work. But as soon as they're a knowledge worker and there's some creative thinking involved, it's actually not incentivizing them. And that's why it's so key for us to go back to the intrinsic motivation of the autonomy and the mastery, etc. So I think that's another point. There's a big shift towards how do we reward, how do we incentivize, is it individual-based, is it team-based? Here are some of the themes. I don't think we have enough time to really have a look at that, but you will see specifically with reward, it's moving away from the salary is the motivator to salary is a hygiene factor. And what that basically means, it means pay the people sufficient that the issue of money is off the table. It's not on the table anymore. For me, this one, it really summarized the connection theme. So if we really take care about everyone in the ecosystem, then the profits will actually flow from there. So the next one is psychological safety, and I think psychological safety for me, I'm so passionate about the topic, simply because I so often see what we call skilled incompetence. So what does skilled incompetence mean? It means that you have a group of really competent people, but what we see is when they're together in a group, they actually decided not to speak up. They see plans being implemented that they know will not work, but they just don't have the courage to speak up. And that is why psychological safety for me is so important. I mean, we have the war for talent. We do so much to get the right people in our businesses. And then suddenly we think, oh, have we made a wrong appointment? What's happening? The guy was so clever, all the psychometrics or whatever you might do, all the case studies worked well. But now that he's in the actual work environment, no, he's just not, or he or she is not doing their bit. And I think that is why I need to ask leaders, how intentional are you about psychological safety? And I think if we think of psychological safety, it's really, this is the definition, Dr. Amy Edmondson from Harvard, where she says, psychological safety is the shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So I think that's really how safe are the people feeling. The second one that I just want to share with you is the one from Brené Brown, and why this one for me is so important is, if we want people to fully show up, if we want them to innovate and solve problems, they need to feel that they're seen and heard. And that is the type of environment that we need to build. Because if we say we want people to innovate, that is the type of environment. Now, interesting enough, we have spoken a few times about empathy. Now, if you think about cognitive empathy, that is the type of empathy where you can actually put yourself in another person's shoes. So it's not the empathy where I see you sad and I actually connect with you at that level. It's really the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. that cognitive empathy they call is the glue for innovation. And I think that is why if we think of the design thinking principles, that's why we would do empathy maps, because we then put ourselves in the shoes of the other person. So, when they did the OKR game yesterday, I thought I'll just share this with you. There's a psychological safety game as well. You can order it there at the Agile People website. And again, it's just something, a tool to get the conversations going. So there's 2 cards. You will see there's a green unhappy face and a green smiley face. But again, it's the quality of the conversations that a team will have with regards to psychological safety. And I think if we talk about innovation, these things are so key. Remember what Stephen said, it's all about having those, making sometimes those difficult decisions. And I think if you have a look at the hard truths about innovation, this is some of the insight from Gary Pisano, where he said, we will tolerance failure, but not incompetence, and psychological safety on the one side, but we truly are brutally honest with one another. Again, there's a willingness to experiment, but in a very disciplined environment, and we collaborate, yet we keep one another accountable. So the last one, curiosity, and I don't have a lot of time to really talk about curiosity, but I think that's the whole theme about reskilling. So as you sit here as an individual, just think for a moment, what are you doing to focus on that continuous learning? I mean, for us, we know that we learn when you're out of your comfort zone. That is actually, if you're in your comfort zone, you will not necessarily learn as much. And for us to actually focus on that continuous growth mindset, this is what the last point is all about. We haven't really spoken about transversal skills, but that's the type of skills that you need for the future of work. It's not really necessarily learned in a classroom. So I actually like the quote where they say, you learn or you grow in the flow. So grow in the flow mean that it doesn't mean that you have to go to a workshop. You don't have to be doing something specific on the internet. It's really about, do you as a manager create that moment where you intentionally turn something into a learning moment? So we need to shift our minds with regards to that as well. And then I was so glad that John spoke about resilience this morning, because I would like to show you this slide here. If we talk about wellness, we talk about burnout, and what do we actually want to do? We want to prevent burnout. We want to build resilience, and we want to build high-performing teams. Now, if you have a look at the 4 circles in the middle, you'll see it's resilience, learning capacity, innovation capacity, self-leadership. A lot of themes that you have heard over the last 2 days. Now, what this is showing you, it's the drivers that is helping you to build resilience. And I just want for a moment to focus. You will see there's 3 different types: foundational, emotional, higher order drivers. But on the left-hand side, you will see even things like exercise, your sleep cycle. How do you silence your mind during the day? Those types of things, if you think of your brain-body connection, is key for us to build resilience. And that is my wish for you, that in this world where we need to adapt and change, that you will take care of yourself as well. Because otherwise you will put everything in, and you might be one of the statistics of burnout. I would like to end with this slide here. I'm not going to play the video. Evan, you spoke about above and below the line yesterday. I think it might be this video here. So just take a shot of that. It's really very nice to have a look at where are your location. It's one of the videos that we use in the talent course, and just thinking of self-awareness. So I think that's definitely something that I would recommend. And so lastly, just to remember, if you want to become a chameleon whisperer, remember your 3 C's. It's your currency, the psychological safety that you build for your team. To connect, remember it's not a one-size-fits-all. And how do you do that? Through being curious. Experiment and learn, ask the questions, and that's it from my side. Thank you so much.